Hi everybody, my name is Sive and welcome to Stories in Sive. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read this past month for the Asian Readathon, which was hosted by withcindy in honor of Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, which was in May, and now it's the end of May, and I read a couple of books for it and participated in the challenges, and I wanted to chat through what I read. So let's just dive in. There were 5 challenges that you needed to complete, and the first challenge was read any book by an Asian author. The second challenge was to read a book with an Asian protagonist. The third challenge was to read a book by an Asian author that was in your favorite genre. The fourth challenge was to read any nonfiction by an Asian author. And the fifth challenge was to read any book by an Asian author that was not US-centric. You could combine these challenges or read them in any order. However, if you were to read a book that met the challenge for 3 and 5, you had to pick an author of a different Asian ethnicity for combining 1 and 2. So she had just that parameter in place to encourage reading from a diverse group of authors. The first book that I read was The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nevo, and this book for me filled the challenge number 3 and number 5. So reading a book by an Asian author that is in your favorite genre, and then reading a book by an Asian author that is not US-centric. It is set in a world that is said to resemble the Chinese Empire, but it is not specifically referenced here. So I also, for challenge number 3, the favorite genre, I don't have a favorite genre. I've gone back and forth so many times of my life of what my favorite genre is, but fantasy is definitely my most read. And so this kind of is the way I decided to fill that prompt. So The Empress of Salt and Fortune, like I said, is a fantasy story about a young empress who is married into the royal court. She's from the north, and there is dissension between her land and the land that she is now marrying into, and the marriage is a political alliance to encourage and rectify that relationship between the north and south. However, this new empress is extremely strong and has her own motivations, and that is explored in the book. The book is told from the perspective of her handmaiden Rabbit, who you can see on the front cover here, and Rabbit is now older and is relaying this story in a very kind of like myth folklore storytelling setting to her younger family, because she's like the grandma. Now Rabbit is like the matriarch of her family, and she's telling the story of this empress whose name is Inyo. This is a short novella and I really liked it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the very whimsical writing. It was definitely very folklore storytelling. It was beautiful, and it spoke about grief and relationships and revenge, and there were a lot of themes that I enjoyed. I didn't find that this book gave me anything that I hadn't experienced before, but I did really like it, so I gave it 3 stars. The next book I read was The Bride Test by Helen Huang, and this is a romance story. It's a contemporary romance about a young woman whose name is Esme and is from Vietnam, and she runs into this older woman, and she is basically brought to America to meet this woman's son, and her son's name is Kai, and Kai is very set in his ways. He is very meticulous and very scheduled, and he's actually on the autism spectrum, and so he does not prioritize romantic relationships or many friendship relationships at all. And his mom kind of like takes it into her own hands. She's like, you're not gonna get me a grandkid, so I gotta do it. So she carts Esme over to America. And Esme has an incentive to kind of seduce Kai and get him to want to be with her, because she has her own family that she needs to take care of, and she feels that going to America would be a better option for them. And it goes through their romance, and it was good. It was really cute. I'd read Helen Huang's story before. I read The Kiss Quotient, which was actually her first book, and I liked that one a lot better than this one. And from the reviews and such that I have read since finishing The Bride Test, I have the popular opinion. A lot of people agree that The Kiss Quotient was a little bit better. And so again, I enjoyed it. It was really cute. It was steamy. But the characters kind of had very forced chemistry. I didn't really fully understand why Esme started to get feelings for Kai when that eventually happened. I just like wasn't, I don't know, I maybe like just wasn't following it. But the thing is like I project myself onto the female characters. If I don't find that guy attractive, how am I supposed to believe that you find him attractive if there's not enough detail and explanation about his personality and why you're attracted to that? So I just didn't feel that there was a whole lot of that there. That's why this book is getting a 3-star. However, I did very much enjoy myself. It was a good time. And so the bride test for all of the challenges fulfilled challenge number 2, which is to read a book about a Asian protagonist. The third book that I read for the Asian Readathon was The 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi, and this is a nonfiction telling of the timeline of the history of Palestine and the Israeli-Palestine conflict. I had seen a lot of stuff, as we all have, in the news over the past weeks of this conflict escalating to some pretty crazy violence, and I was watching and following along, but I didn't really feel that I was fully understanding what was happening. And so I did some research and found this book, and this book is by a Palestinian man, and I needed more context. And so this book goes through the timeline of between 1917 and 2017 of all of these different events that led up to and spurred and drove dissension between these two peoples. It was extremely informative. I learned so much. I learned about Britain's role in creating that dissension. I learned about the different revolts. I learned about the Suez War. I learned about the occupation of Egypt. I learned about how World War II and the wrap up of that and the creation of the EU helped drive these two peoples farther apart, and I learned about the lack of representation, and it was just so much information, and I was able to take a couple notes because I didn't have the physical copy of this book. I listened to it via audiobook, and I would recommend it for anybody who is looking for a little bit more context and wanting to understand and do your own research. I would definitely recommend this book. Rashid Khalidi is a professor, and he has a lot of academic research, and his resume is pretty impressive. And one of the ways that he wrapped up his synopsis of this was kind of like a disclaimer, because if you're reading from a Palestinian context, not context, but point of view and perception, he felt the need to wrap up his synopsis this way. The 100 Years' War on Palestine is not a chronicle of victimization, nor does it whitewash the mistakes of Palestinian leaders or deny the emergence of national movements on both sides. In reevaluating the forces arraying against Palestinians, it offers an illuminating new view of a conflict that continues to this day. I kind of took that to mean that it was just going to be more factual. This man is Palestinian, and he has his own perspective, and he talks about his family living in Beirut and their experience with revolts and how that affected their day-to-day life and their kids' lives. But that was a smaller portion of the book. It was definitely factual and based on research and information that he has gathered. Yeah, I just learned so much, and I would so heavily recommend this to anybody who is looking for some more information on that, and so that you can kind of provide yourself some context to what we're seeing now, and then maybe you can be more educated in your conversations with people around you and in your inner circle. So I would definitely recommend this book. So this book fulfilled prompt number 4, which was the nonfiction by an Asian author. I just remembered, I'm sorry. For the 100 Years' War in Palestine, I gave that book 4 stars. And then the last book that I read for the Asian Readathon was Bride of the Sea by Eman Quotah. Bride of the Sea is a literary fiction. This is a debut novel, and it was one of my anticipated releases of 2021. I wasn't really planning to have this book read for this. However, it just timed really well. It got into my library and I had my little hold on it, came through, and I picked it up just in time. But it was very good. It follows our two main characters, Munir, who is the boy, and Saeed, who is the woman, and they get together and get married. And it is about their families. It's set in Saudi Arabia, and their marriage really struggles. Essentially what happens is Saeed gets pregnant very early on at 19 years old, and they have their beautiful little daughter. There's a lot of fear and dissension in their marriage during her pregnancy, and by the time Hinadi is born, they are really not doing great. So they eventually get separated and they had divorce. And this book follows Hinadi as she grows up, and Saeed had so much fear because in this culture, when the daughter hits around, I think it said 7 years old, they kind of like stop hanging out with their mom so much and like start hanging out with like dad's side of the family so that he can get to know her well enough to be able to say, yes, this potential suitor is going to be good for you and work well with you or something like that. And Saeed really didn't want to give her up, and so she abducts Hannadi and they disappear and they go on the run for the majority of her life until about 15 years old. They find her and track her down, and it basically goes through her rediscovery of her identity. When Saeed and Munir got married, they moved to America so Munir could complete his upper level education at a university there. Saeed loved it and she did not want to go back. So after he finished his university, she wanted to stay and Munir went back to Saudi Arabia. When Hannadi is eventually relocated at the age of 15, she is now reintroduced to this life and this culture of her family back in Saudi Arabia, and she goes there to visit. She is then faced with the question of what she wants to do. This book had beautiful writing and I enjoyed that element of it. A lot of rhetoric around the exploration of identity and culture and who you are. There was a lot of grief and loss in this story. It had an unusual pacing though, because certain elements took forever and then like 10 years instantly passed. I don't normally mind a slow burn, but because the beginning was so fast and so quick and just like so much happened, and then the middle it just like slowed way down, and then by the end we're sped up and Hannadi's a grown woman. And so that type of pacing, the inconsistency of that was really not something that I enjoyed. I felt like I had gotten a little bit of whiplash around reading that. Ultimately, I did like this book. I'm very, very glad that I read it, but I'm only going to give this 3 stars, which is a great rating because that means I liked it. That means like it was good. I feel like people are like, oh, if I liked it, that means I'm going to give it 4 or 5 stars. Like 5-star book for me is like, I am never gonna forget this book. It's gonna stay and live in my head rent free, and that is not this book. But I did enjoy it, so I'm giving 3 stars to Bride of the Sea. And so this book completes challenge 1, which is read a book by an Asian author. Of course, all of these challenges were kind of interchangeable. You could have used this one as the Asian protagonist story, so there was a little bit of flexibility there. I kind of just chose at random for some of the challenges. So those are all of the completed challenges. I do want to mention one other book that I read and, well, I DNF'd it at halfway, and that is The Gilded Ones. I didn't like this book. So this is a heist story and it is fantasy. It has a whole magic system that I didn't feel was very well developed or fully explained. And this book is like a little bit over 400 pages long and I wanted to give it some time. So I did read half of it before I DNF'd it. But like the first little bit, I was like, this is not great. Like, I'm not getting it. The characters were a little bit cliched to me. The villain, not scary. So I just didn't really have a whole lot of stake. I wasn't very invested. Though I did want to give it a try, but yeah, it was not for me, so I did DNF that book. Overall, I really enjoyed this readathon. It was very fun. I enjoyed doing my own research. Of course, I make the intention to diversify my reading all the time, so I had a couple of these already on my radar, but was happy to read them and give them kind of a purpose and participate with this. I always enjoy these type of readathons and following along with other people as well, and then maybe I'll just add more to my TBR because I know people read some really amazing books this month by Asian authors. So thank you, withcindy, for hosting, and I was happy to participate. I'm also going to link withcindy's video down below so that you can check it out, because in her description she links the story graph that she made. Essentially breaks down all the different countries of Asia underneath these different countries, and then also genres. So she has like romance by Asian authors, LGBTQ by Asian authors, all sorts of stuff. There have been almost 7,000 books added to the story graph over this month by a variety of different people because it's open to anybody. And so if you're interested in like reading a book from Vietnam or a book from India, it's beautifully categorized and it does my type A brain wonders. I loved it. It was a great resource and will continue to be a good resource. So I did just want to quickly direct you there. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a good time. I know I did, and have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!